This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Early Birds. Thank you for joining us today. We're actually going to give folks a few more minutes.
Everyone can see we're together as we walk on by, and we fly just like birds of a feather. I want you to know all of the people around us, they say, can they be that close? Just let me speak for the record. We're giving love in a family dog. We are family. Yeah. We are family. Get up, everybody, and sing. Sing it to me. We are family. I got all my sisters with me. We are family. Get up, everybody, and sing. Living life is fun, and we just begun to get our share of this world's delight. I hope they have for the future and our goals inside. We know we don't get depressed. Here's what we call our golden rule. Have faith in you and the things you do. You won't go wrong. Oh no, this is our family jewel. We are.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Yeah? Okay, good. So I wanted to say welcome. My name is Rika Rodriguez. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I will be your moderator today. Today's webinar is our first in the 6-part series brought to you by the Positive Women's Network and Groundswell Fund, GOI program. Over the course of the summer, we will cover many topics. We invite you to practice new things, and if we do this right, we will build a new learning community with you. We will also have a diverse and dynamic facilitation team for each webinar. There are 2 ways that you can approach these series. Number 1 is pick and choose the topics and dates from the menu that interest you, or you can take the whole series as a course. We have over 100 participants attending this webinar. Woohoo! So we won't be able to do the traditional introductions. Therefore, we would like to invite folks to open the chat box and introduce yourself by sharing your name, pronoun, organization, and the city that you're based in. While y'all are doing that, we're going to go ahead and get started with our first topic in the series, which is history and approaches to social change. All right. And we're going to get started by going back in the key moments of history, organizing history, excuse me, to root ourselves in a long legacy of struggle, as well as to trace the common elements that link these moments. Then we're going to delve into the spectrum of social change approaches. You're invited to post comments and questions in the chat box throughout the session, and we'll have a few polls before we wrap up with an open forum, and we'll take questions from participants. And now I'd like to introduce our first facilitator, Mrs. Shannon Robinson.
Thanks, Rika.
You're welcome.
Like Rika said, I'm Shannon Robinson. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm really happy to be with you here today with you from beautiful Grand Junction, Colorado, about 4 hours west of Denver. We're going to start by looking at moments in history of struggles of social justice to both honor the struggles of the past and draw on much needed inspiration in our given times. We're going to go back to 1940 during World War II to a question of loyalty in a time of war. We're going to play 2 short video clips, and then we'll take some time to reflect and share comments in the chat box.
All right, we're just queuing up those videos, so give us a minute.
Well, when the registration was first introduced into Heart Mountain, actually, after I read the thing, I really couldn't believe that they were asking, like, question 27 and 28. Up to that point, I didn't see any problem with it. But it was, I think, the heading was Statement of Factory for Relief Plans or something like that. I don't remember exact wording, but the logo on top of that questionnaire was that of the Selective Service System. And when 27 asked about will you go into combat duty, whoever ordered, I thought it was a very stupid and a very arrogant question to ask of us after we were thrown out of our homes and put into these concentration camps without even a word about our citizenship rights or civil rights or constitutional rights being restored. And then question 28 was very another very ambiguous and a very senseless question, because it said will you one of the phrases was, will you forswear allegiance to the Emperor of Japan? And something that we had never sworn allegiance to the Emperor of Japan. How can we forswear something we had never sworn to before? So that didn't make sense. And then for our parents to forswear allegiance to Japan, that would left them without a country. They'd become stateless persons. So it really made me very angry just reading that thing, and that's when I got sort of involved into it.
Do you want to do the next one? And now we have the second video of that same time.
My dad was listening to the radio, and we found out Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and we knew something bad was going to happen.
Suddenly, to be Japanese was then to be identified with the enemy.
When I came home from school, Mom was crying and she said, they took Papa, the FBI took him away.
First thing they said after the train started moving was pull the shades down. We were prisoners.
Over 120,000 Japanese Americans were incarcerated during World War II. It was a hell. Hell.
There's been this prevailing myth that Japanese Americans did not protest their wartime incarceration.
My father renounced his citizenship. He had spoken out about their rights being violated and was charged with sedition.
I felt that I was a citizen and they're questioning me.
The government created this thing that became a monster, Tule Lake. The camp became kind of a punitive center.
At Tule Lake, for the first time, American troops under orders tortured people.
We have 12,000 people who are defined as disloyal because they did a very American thing, which was to dissent.
That's the time I saw the white against yellow. They called in the military and declared martial law.
It's far and away to shame them.
How do you become an enemy if you're an American citizen?
Tule Lake totally destroys that mythology that there was no protest.
And Shannon, we're going to turn it back to you.
The last clip talks about resistance at the Tule Lake Segregation Center. As we mentioned in the clip, many folks to this day are not aware of the many forms of resistance from the people in the camps, such as the campaign organized by thousands of imprisoned citizens called the Temporary Tule Lake Japanese Committee. Between 1942 and 1946, the camps were home to more than 120,000 people of Japanese descent. 2/3 of those were U.S. citizens. The rest were permanent residents. To the U.S. government, answering no to question 27 and 28 indicated disloyalty and was their first act of resistance. Over 4,000 refused to say no. The no-no boys, who answered no to question 27 and 28, and others who questioned internment, were placed in the Tule Lake Segregation Center in Northern California. 2 incidents in October 1943, which caused the death and injury of internees, fueled organizing and opposition to the camp that led to the work stoppage of 800 workers on the Tule Lake's 2,900-acre farm. On November 1st, the temporary Tule Lake Japanese Committee mobilized 5,000 men, women, and children to surround the administration building and demand increased food allotments, establish an evacuee governing body, and rehire terminated workers with back pay. On November 14th, 1943, martial law was declared in Tule Lake. 350 internees were arrested and 1,200 relocated, effectively stopping the Tule Lake resistance. For our reflection, we ask that you think about what are the problems, how do they change it, and what was won? Among the many stories and moments in history, this one, perhaps, some don't know. Lisa will share some questions from the chat box.
Yeah, we want to encourage folks to consider these questions after viewing those clips. And feel free to share those answers that, you know, that are coming to you, what you're thinking right now, in the chat box, and we're happy to have a short conversation about it. Again, the reflection questions are: what are the problems, or what were the problem? What was the problem being faced in this moment in history? How did folks most impacted by the problem take action on behalf of themselves to change it, and what was won? So we have Eve commenting that infringement on their legal human rights and oppression. Absolutely. That was the problem, but during that time it was accepted. It was a lot in a lot of ways. It was the government enacting sanctioned violence against, for the most part, U.S. citizens and people who had legal permanent residence here in the United States. How did folks change it? What did they do? They certainly, it wasn't the big change in terms of being able to leave the camp when they wanted to, but they made a change. Okay, somebody's commenting they worked together to change it, and it was short-lived, but they attempted it, right? Even in those circumstances, in the situation where they were, folks have to remember that Tule Lake was very much a prison, as was mentioned in the video clip. There were armed soldiers surrounding them. They were beaten. It was, as the clip says, encouraged to for torture to be enacted on them. Yet they still resisted, even in that situation. Yeah, the assumption was that simply because they were, someone's commenting that the assumption that they were all the same, because they were of Japanese descent. There was a racialized, xenophobic, accepted, not only repression and oppression, but actually viewing them as prisoners of war and terror threats. Do any of the other panelists, facilitators, have any reflections that y'all are thinking of right now based on those clips? For me, it's very, very moving to see elders speaking and remembering what that was like for them. And we think about what's happening right now in this country with regards to concentration camps and detention centers. It's very, very triggering for me. But other folks want to comment?
I agree. We're seeing this now, and I hope that we can stand up to this and somehow change the world.
Yeah, there's another comment here that I'm going to read out loud, and folks can be following along in the chat box as well. Janine is commenting that they utilized what power they had at their disposal and tried to find a solution by banding together and resisting. Even if they didn't accomplish their goal, they accomplished something by forcing the entities holding them to move them. Absolutely. This is what is so inspirational about this quick little moment in history. And indeed, yes, it's not taught in school. And it's really terrible and unfortunate. Yet these moments in history continue to be fostered and shared, and we have to be those bearers of these stories.
want to see if there's any other comments from folks on the facilitation panel, or folks in the chat box. What concretely was won? What were they fighting for? Even in their prison conditions, what were they fighting for? For social justice? Can we get specific?
Mm-hmm.
I know that the slide, the bulleted slide, we kind of went through really quickly. They were fighting for their rights, yes. And real basic stuff, like increased food allotment, right? Humane treatment, bereavement costs for the individuals that were killed in the accidents. The initial outrage from the internees was because the truck turned over and pinned someone down, and they were killed. And they were that spurred the work stoppage, right? That spurred the work stoppage because it was unsafe, and one death was too many, right? One death was too many.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, I mean, we hear this often. What we're hearing many of the hunger strikes of folks who are incarcerated today. It's really about basic decency, basic material needs to live, which is a terrible thing to think that folks, even in those situations, just want to be treated well. And fair treatment and being treated as a human being with dignity, even in those conditions. Yes, Katie's commenting, fear was allowed to drive policy. The fear must be confronted. Fear was robbing them of their humanity. Indeed. Thank you all for sharing in the chat box. And we will, I will hand it back to Shannon to take us to another moment in history. And keep sharing your thoughts and your feelings in the chat box as we continue. That this is what this space is for. And we will be pausing at different times to share your comments and your questions if you have any. Welcome your questions at all. We welcome your questions, any questions at all. And I'll just hand it back to Shannon now. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Lisa. Now we'll jump forward to November of 1955. We'll play 2 short video clips, and then we'll take some more time to reflect and share comments in the chat box.
Some are scattered through the town. And not all are exclusively Negro either, but most are. Yes, this might be any city of the Deep South going about its daily business. What's different about it now, especially here in the heart of the city? What's different? The buses are empty. Why? Because the Negro people aren't driving them. Because one woman, a seamstress, tired after a hard day's work, got fed up with her 40 years of living under Jim Crow. Because one woman said, I have had enough. And suddenly, just like that, 50,000 voices answered, Amen, sister, enough for us too. For refusing to give up her seat to a white man, she was arrested and fined. And the Negro people of Montgomery have refused to ride the buses ever since. They walked instead. They rode in cars their own cars, and of anyone who would give them a lift. The buses waited still and lonely in their silent rows, or rode empty through the streets. They were threatened and intimidated, arrested, convicted, and fined, and still they walked. In the rain and the sun and the dark of night, they walked with God and shunned the buses. They walked with God and they rode with God too, for they formed a carpool that was a marvel of quick organization. A network of cars, old and new, of trucks and taxis, reached out across the city and carried people where they wanted to go. It started as a one-day protest, nothing more. But it grew until it rocked the cradle of the Confederacy and told the world a story of Negro people united for action without bitterness, without malice, without fear. It began with the buses in Montgomery, but so much more is at stake now, for this is a part of the struggle going on around the world, for the right to enjoy decent homes like anyone else, to work at better jobs for higher pay, and the right to live longer too. The right to an equal place in the family of man.
With Click, you can use data to transform every part of your business.
Before the boycott, 2/3 of the bus riders were black. After December 5th, there were almost no blacks at the segregated bus stops or on the buses. They walked, and they created a complex system that used private cars to carry thousands of people each day.
We asked for persons who had cars and would voluntarily put them in the transportation pool to let us know and what time they could be used. And in that way, we could know when we would have cars and where they had to go to pick up people. People would call in and say, I'm out here on Cloverdale Road in such and such a block, and I'll be ready at such and such a time. But this was being done all through the day, and we would know what time they were supposed to be picked up and where they were.
It was really surprising because we thought, well, maybe some of the people would continue to ride the bus. But after all, they had been mistreated and been mistreated in so many different ways until I guess they were tired and they just decided that they just wouldn't ride.
The black community was inspired by its own success. They held meetings with the mayor and the bus company and found they could stand up to the city commissioners.
At first, we didn't even ask for desegregation. We only asked for a more humane system of segregation on the buses. And when the opposition refused to grant that, then we realized that they wouldn't grant anything anyway. So we might as well ask for, complete desegregation. And that's what we went for. We realized we had to go for broke, so to speak.
Among the many stories and moments of history, this one perhaps, and hopefully the one that everyone knows. After decades of resistance and struggle, Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat sparks a movement that drives change for close to 2 decades. Again, we want to invite you all to reflect on these questions and chat your comments or reflections to the clips. The questions are, what are the problems portrayed in the clips? How do they change their circumstances? And what was won? And again, Lisa's going to share some comments and questions from the chat box.
Thank you, Shannon. Yeah. Just give folks a few seconds to reflect and take a look at these questions. They're the same questions from the previous moment in history. I also want to invite the other facilitators if you have any comments or reflections from viewing these clips. One of these clips is from one of my favorite history, I love history series, but this Eyes on the Prize, it's available to be viewed in its entirety on YouTube. I highly encourage folks to watch it. This is just a small clip, footage from that time. So I'm starting to notice folks comment in the chat box. Gail says, notice how it was a woman who decided enough was enough. And the problems were segregation and discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, not even a full generation after the constitutional end of chattel slavery, right? And Jim Crow in its iteration at that time, to continue that system of white supremacy and enslavement. Yeah, the specific problem was segregated seating on the buses. But as one of the clips, one of the folks being interviewed says that there was just so many levels of being tired, right? Probably of seeing their grandparents being tired, seeing their parents of being tired. And this wasn't the first time that there had been small acts of resistance about the buses specifically. Earlier that year, there was a young woman who had refused to give up her seat, but that was just one moment in many moments. This is the same time that Emmett Till was murdered in another state, right? So there was just so many things happening. What was one? Complete desegregation of the bus system. Yep. And what is inspiring to me about this particular moment is because it is such a stark example of the power of collective solidarity. They had almost 100% of the population, of the Black population at the time that was using the bus, they just stopped riding the bus. And that degree of solidarity, and that common feeling, that widely felt feeling of being tired, but being tired of Jim Crow, being tired of it all, is what sparked this movement and held it together. So let's see here. Folks stood together and boycott the bus system. Yes. The power of economic boycott. They started the carpool and they joined Rosa Parks. Yes. Claudette Colvin was only 15 years old. Earlier that year in March. Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat in November, but just earlier that year, a 15-year-old had also refused to give up her seat. Yes, I agree, Nana. They were so organized. And they were organized because they already had a base, an organized base of women who were ready at the moment to take action when the sparks started to fly. So it didn't come from nothing. It didn't consolidate organization in the instant. There had been already years of work to organize through the churches, organize through different civic circles, mainly the leadership of Black women that leafleted I can't remember how many hours, but in a very short amount of time, created the flyers that were needed to be distributed the very next day and were able to immediately have an impact on the economic viability of the bus system. They got the attention right away, and everyone came together and organized those rides. It's just such a beautiful example of both, like I said earlier, collective action through solidarity, but also having that system, an organized base of people already in place. Janine is commenting here, I feel that the independents also gained from finding a solution by banding together and using their own vehicles would inevitably gain power and perseverance if they had not been prior, because as a people they were controlled and not allowed that level of self-autonomy. Absolutely. Absolutely. Any comments or reflections from the other facilitators? A lot of great comments. Folks are chatting.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the comments in the chat box are great, and we also have a few comments in the question and answer box, and we have those both open, so if people want to do one or the other, that is great. We'll just keep looking at both of them.
Mm-hmm. Great, yes. And so, yeah, I do invite folks, it's episode 1 of Eyes on the Prize. If you want to check that out. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next moment in history. Take it away, Shannon.
Thanks, Lisa. Our last case study brings us to 1965. Much has happened since Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat just 10 years prior to this moment in history. It's the story of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The National Welfare Rights Organization, in 1965, welfare offices were routinely denied benefits. They routinely denied benefits to families who were eligible, often claiming that there were no procedures or application forms. NWRO members decided to make their own forms and have members apply en masse. They organized a citywide minimum standard days of action demanding furniture and clothing. They stormed their local welfare office with over 100 people and demanded their application be accepted. 2 weeks later, the welfare office announced that they would officially accept their application forms and make benefits available to all. NWRO organizers developed campaign kits. Again, these women developed campaign kits to distribute, and they were replicated all over the country and increased funding to welfare recipients. In New York City alone, payments increased from $1.2 million in 1963 to $40 million in 1968. By 1969, NWRO had an estimated membership of over 22,000 families nationwide, most of them Black, with chapters in nearly every state and every major city.
And
do we have time to cue that video?
So actually that one I couldn't get to load, so we're not going to be able to see that video, but we'll go ahead and share that link with people.
Great.
I was able to watch a little bit of that earlier, and it was really, really powerful. Thank you for getting that, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
Very few people have heard of the incredible scale and power built by poor Black mothers through the NWRO. We can see in a few bullet points from earlier the incredible work they did on behalf of their rights and resources to recognition as mothers. Feel free again to reflect on these questions and write your comments in the chat box. Again, what problems were addressed by these women? What impacted these, and what impact did they have from the government? What did they change, and what was one?
Going to let folks think about that. I just dropped the video into the chat box. It is an interview with Scott Piven, who is a philosopher, historian, organizer, and was very active in the early nascent formations of this form of economic justice rights movement, which centered on women. If you watch that clip in its entirety, she will talk about how this movement for the rights of mothers to have a basic standard minimum to be able to survive was led almost entirely by Black mothers, even though they were not the majority of folks who were on the rolls. Majority of folks receiving what we now call welfare benefits at the time were white women. Though while the folks in the forefront fighting for increased payments and actual procedures and applications to access the benefits that they were eligible for were Black mothers. And so this idea of the right to mother, right, the right to be home with your children, was actually in contrast to, at the time, what was happening in the mainstream feminist movement, right? At this time, most white women in the feminist movement were fighting to get out of the house. They wanted to go to work. They wanted, we had the ERA, we had just equal access to be in the workforce. And poor Black mothers wanted to be with their family, and actually advanced the idea that the labor of mothering, and that is a right, historically a right that had been denied to them because of slavery, and it was a right that was very central to them, and one that the mainstream feminist movement just didn't catch, right? They didn't quite catch that. So I want to, okay, look at the chat box. Their salaries went up in 2 years, all thanks again to the unity of mothers. Yes, and the unity of Black mothers. And just want to go back to the some of the data that the previous slide was saying, that the amount of payments, how they increased. I can imagine the just measly, the very very small amount of income that women were forced to try to eke a subsistence out of, and how the quality of life, the material quality of life, radically changed for folks who were the in many ways the most demeaned people, the most insulted people in this country, Black poor mothers, and they were able to win real material change to their life that didn't just benefit them, benefited white women, right? Because they were the majority who were actually drawing from welfare. Here's a comment. It was a powerful moment that Black women stood in solidarity to feed their children and accept applications nationwide for women, which gave 22,000 Black family benefits. Actually gave much more than that. That's just the membership base of the National Welfare Rights Organization at its peak across the country. you have to keep in mind that these campaigns were being run and tested all over the country because welfare, AFDC, as it was called at the time, was not a federalized program. Other programs are federalized, aid to the disabled, aid to the blind, and aid to the elderly. But because of the, as in the clip, if you watch the clip, what Francis Scott Piven says is that it was the racialized, it was a racialized decision to not federalize AFDC, therefore giving the states and local counties full reign to do what they wanted, which is why the campaign packets were so valuable, because you could take them anywhere and you could test the system, right? You could make up your own forms. Here, let's see some more comments. Nana, they multiplied the amount of welfare payments by a huge amount. They also created an infrastructure for folks to organize in other cities. Pretty amazing to build a national membership of more than 20,000 folks like that of low-income Black women without the internet. Thank you, right? Without the internet, the old school way. Those old school ways are still really effective, but internet, you know, is absolutely wonderful. It's why we're here right now. Great. Okay, I'm going to let's see, hand it to Rika. Yeah, well, I'm already speaking actually, so let's jump right in. We're gonna shift gears. And I didn't introduce myself. My name's Elisa Maria Castellanos, and I am a grassroots organizing institute coach with the Groundswell Fund. I'm really, really happy to be here, to be working with these beautiful folks, helping to facilitate. Yeah. Okay, so thank you, Shannon, and also to Barb for managing the tech and the slides, and want to get us into our next section. So here's the right slide. That's right. Okay. So in each of these moments of history that we visited today, there are so many that we can, we could create little vignettes and clips to just kind of remember just all these moments of history. The common thread, if you kind of take a moment to, if you're on video, to see this slide, is how we see that the most insulted and the most demeaned people in this country risk everything for the sake of collective action and solidarity, and in a sense, become empowered, right? You know, folks might, I don't know what folks' relationship is to that word empowered, right? Sometimes when I hear it, I kind of roll my eyes. I'm like, oh, you know, in a lot of ways that word has been kind of misused in a lot of ways. And we want to kind of present a new relationship with the word empowered. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide to get the actual definition of empowerment. And I actually, you know, just read this definition maybe a year ago, because I always had this relationship with empowerment as a condescending thing, as, you know, we're empty vessels and they're giving us something. But if you look at the actual definition of empowerment, and I'll just go ahead and read it. Empowerment refers to actions taken to increase the degree of autonomy and self-determination in people and in communities in order to enable them to represent their interests in a responsible and self-determined way, acting on their own authority. So this isn't the other empowerment that we often hear, which, you know, sometimes has been gutted, right? It's like, what does it mean? This is a little different, right? Let me read it again. Empowerment refers to actions taken to increase the degree of autonomy and self-determination in people and in communities in order to enable them to represent their interests in a responsible and self-determined way, acting on their own authority. This understanding of empowerment not only holds dignity, but is radical and maybe even revolutionary in, if we take it, put into the context of the times that we're living in now, right? The idea of autonomy, of self-determination, of representing your own interests and having your own authority are very powerful words, very powerful concepts. And in our second section that we're going to go into right now, we're going to explore empowerment from this definition. And we will drop the definition into the chat box a couple times so folks can remember it. We're going to explore empowerment as a spectrum of approaches. In other words, where there is one end of increasing empowerment and another end where a different form of empowerment is happening. And Rika is going to lead us. So I'm going to hand it back to Rika. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, so I'm going to ask folks to get a piece of paper and something to write with if you can. If you can't, just listen along. First, I want you to draw a line horizontally across your paper, like a continuum or an x-axis. At each end, you want to draw an arrow. Now I want you to draw 5 vertical benchmarks or short lines perpendicular to the horizontal line you drew. They should be equally spaces apart with the further benchmarks at each end of the horizontal line. All right, so now I want you to label the benchmarks starting from the left. The first benchmark is directive services. The second is education. The third is self-help. The fourth is advocacy. And the fifth, and the last on the far right, is direct action organizing. These are approaches to social change on the empowerment spectrum.
And Rika, I'm just gonna jump in to ask folks if there's a need to define any of these for folks and what we mean by these approaches, or if it would be, or folks can drop that in the chat box. Let us know if you need us to do some quick definitions of what we mean by these. Okay, yes, please define the terms. Great. So let's start with direct service. Direct service, what are some examples of direct service? We could think of maybe the food pantry, where the purpose of the organization is to provide a particular service to a particular population. So you can think of food pantry, you can think of legal service, right? The exchange might be transactional, right? You're going to get something. Other examples of service, do other panelists have ideas of what an example of a direct service might be? A teen shelter, right? You know, if the teen shelter is exclusively just providing beds for the night, for example, that would be a service as well. Healthcare, gift cards, yep. TANF and SNAP are government services. They are services, they're government service. Most of what we're thinking about is community-based services, so I'll just add that. Helping homeless people with lunch bags. Yes, those are services. They might also lean into another approach on this spectrum, which is self-help, right? So if it's not an organization helping homeless folks, and if it's volunteers who are just on their own, self-determined to put together some sandwiches and take them to the park, that's a service, and it's also something folks are doing on their own. Could be that. Syringe access. I was thinking about you, Rika. Yes, that's a service. Okay, so we got great examples of service. Let's move to education. When we say education as a social change approach, we think of, yes, churches also serve too. But when we think of education, we think of schools, think of maybe adult ed, think of maybe, how many folks have been to a community-based workshop on something, right? A topic, information, could be in the form of pamphlets, handing out resources and referral. Could be a more formalized space, like a classroom. This webinar, education, right? It can be a social change approach in as much as it is supporting a person's need for a particular information and resource, right? If I am a single mother and I need childcare, and I can go to a workshop, or I can inquire to get some information, or participate in a program so that I can have childcare. That can be education as well. A peer educator. Other folks on the panel have any suggestions for education?
Promotora de salud.
So health promoters do a lot of education on all kinds of different topics. Their little tote bags are full of all kinds of brochures. I love the health promoters.
Yeah, Rika.
Absolutely. Yep. Clipboards and little tote bags. Uniform of a health promoter. Love them. Let's go to the next one. Self-help. I gave an example of self-help. What's another example of self-help? A self-help based approach to social change. Again, that could be a community member or a community noticing a gap, right? It's kind of also called the bootstraps, right? We do it ourselves, right? We're not going to ask the government. We're just going to do it. There's a open lot. Let's go grow some food on it, right? I'm going to start my own business because there aren't any employment services in my town. Just gonna do that. Self-care, right? Absolutely. Don't have access to accessible mental health or other forms of health. I'll learn meditation. I'll do it myself, right? I'll take care of myself. I'm organized to do a lot of self-help. Could be some like drop-in centers where you do your own legal paperwork, right? Other places, other programs. There's organizations that teach people how to grow food in their backyard, right? Just doing it yourself, bootstraps. Advocacy. When we talk about advocacy as a social change approach, what are some of the activities that happen there?
Oops.
So some of the activities for advocacy are typically we can picture like giving testimony at hearings, doing letter drives for policy change, whether that's legislative or administrative, advocating on behalf of communities to decision makers, could be testifying at a city council and speaking on behalf of a community, right? You have a few people. There's lobby day, absolutely. Attending political functions and speaking to those in power about the laws, yes. Advocating for change in policy, legislative or administrative, all the different activities that fall within that. Challenging media by sending letters, meeting with them, a whole bunch of activities that fall under advocacy. Anybody want to add from the panel?
Oh, I saw that Roxy added door knocking. Yay.
Door knocking. Well, door knocking is a method, and in advocacy you can use that method, but it's not just exclusive to door knocking. I mean, to advocacy. You can use door knocking in direct service too. You can use door knocking in any of these approaches, right? It's what you do at the doors that makes it different, and we'll talk about that later. So then the last one is direct action organizing, which is a very particular kind of community organizing. Few of the characteristics of direct action organizing is a campaign, for example, led by folks most impacted by a particular issue. Will launch a campaign, have a target, right? And they will do public activities to leverage power, and also leverage their own power and leverage power from other parts of the community and in the power system to their advantage, to get the decision maker to give them what they want. So examples of direct action organizing, think about a few years ago, folks are familiar with DACA, Deferred Action for youth, the undocumented youth, they call them dreamers, right? There's a DACA that President Obama passed by executive order. And that didn't just come because the goodness of his heart. There were young folks handcuffing themselves to his offices around the country and getting a lot of media. And they were showing up everywhere, all over the country, doing direct actions, doing very public actions to disrupt the status quo, disrupt the everyday, to get attention, and that led to that influence, and I would say led to President Obama's issuing that executive order for DACA. So that's an example, more contemporary example of direct action organizing. What are some other examples? Yes, marches. Marches are interesting because sometimes when you're marching to protest, and mobilizing is important, and mobilizing around issues. But in direct action organizing, you must have a target. And that target is a decision maker. And that decision maker has the power to decide what the outcome of what you want. It's usually in marches, it's a lot of themes, it's very broad. Yes, civil disobedience for the ACA is absolutely a direct action. It's disrupting the status quo, disrupting the everyday. And we put direct action at the very end of the spectrum, because it is a particular form of community organizing that not everyone does. It's sure a lot of fun. But it's like it holds all the elements of community organizing, And that's why you see it here on the spectrum, kind of opposite of the on the other side is direct service, and then the other side you have direct action. So we can move to the next slide. And Rika, I'll just go ahead and do this part.
Perfect, thank you.
Along, yeah. So, so here we see the spectrum, where the further left, or my left, or downstream you go, the closer you are to individual empowerment, right? So I need to go get some work clothes from the clothes closet at my local nonprofit, right? There's nonprofits that have clothes closets for job interviews, right? I want to go do that. I'm doing it for myself. I'm going to the food bank to get food for my family this week. It's for me. It's for myself. It's empowerment, right? It's still that definition of empowerment, but it's individual empowerment. And then if you go further right or upstream, then you start noticing that the approaches to social change are closer to collective empowerment. In other words, that require more people to be working together, right? So in direct service, I can walk into a service organization, get what I need to walk out the door, and I'm good to go. In education, I can go get education for myself. The likelihood of me meeting other people who are in my same situation, who are sitting down and talking and learning something together, increases, right? In self-help, picture a group of folks who are doing something for themselves, right? I can act as an individual and do my own thing, but self-help also lends itself to doing things in collaboration with others. Advocacy absolutely requires other people, right? It's more collective. You need to get folks to sign up to your email list. You got to get people to make calls. You got to make people write letters. You got to move people to action. Is more collective action. And then you get to direct action organizing that is interested in building a base of power, because unless you have a critical mass of people, a direct action and a scale to your critical mass of people, a direct action is less likely to be as impactful as you want it to be. So now what you're seeing in front of you is a spectrum, right? Or the other metaphor that's being offered here is the downstream and an upstream. And that's why I put the little boat. It kind of looks like a little ramen bowl. But I might be hungry, but so you see this stream, right? You go downstream, it's the empowerment. It's individual empowerment. We all need individual empowerment. We all have particular needs that we need to fill. And then there's collective empowerment. And in particular, in these times where we are so very, very much aware and reminded every time we look at our Facebook, every time we get up in the morning, how important and how vital collective empowerment and collective action is. We are going to, and the moments of history that, from the 40s, 50s, and 60s are examples of folks using upstream approaches for collective empowerment to bend the arc of history towards justice, towards dignity, towards humanity. And so we are going to, in the next few slides, Rika is going to guide us through another activity, interactive activity. And we're going to show you 3 different organizations. These are just scenarios, just, made up organizations. She'll read them aloud. And then after we read each one, we're going to ask folks to use their little paper, if you were drawing the spectrum, empowerment spectrum of social change on a piece of paper, we're going to ask you to answer the question of plotting or marking your paper where you think this organization goes on that spectrum. Hopefully that made sense, and I'll let Rika explain it again in a different way. And I'll just hand it over to Rika at this point. Thank you so very much.
Yep, no problem. So, let's see. Sorry, I lost my place where we're at. So we already talked about the plot. I'm going to go ahead and read the organization A. So it helps folks receive general assistance from the county social services with problems regarding their eligibility and checks. They also work with folks receiving general assistance to address issues related to general assistance policy and legislation. Where on the spectrum, based on this definition of empowerment, would this organization fall? Mark this on your paper. And go ahead and put it in the chat box, please.
Rika, I'm gonna drop the definition, this new actual definition of empowerment in the chat box, so if folks need a little refresher.
Awesome.
No problem.
All right, let's go to organization B. So this organization provides employment training to people with mental health problems as part of the program. They are placed in groups and the members talk about their job training experience as well as the course of their job search process. Where on the spectrum, based on this definition of empowerment, would you place this organization? And then go ahead and drop it in the chat box. Or mark it on your paper. And then we have organization C. So this organization engages members around issues the residents and staff feel are important for the community. Most recently, they organized residents to support organization C's application to develop 40 units of affordable housing in the neighborhood. Based on this definition of empowerment, where would you place this organization? And again, drop it in the chat box. All right, so we've got a bunch of stuff in the chat box. Lisa, do you want to go over that? Or you want me to? We can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm mute. I can do it. So yeah, folks are seeing here that we already put up the slide of what the correct answer is, or the most correct answer for these, and several folks put direct action organizing and for organization C. And for organization B, I think it was, there's some education, there's some service, there's some advocacy. Someone said all of them. Mm-hmm. And for organization A, folks said services, advocacy, education. Well, what you see here on the, thank you all for playing that with us. And as you see here, the we've actually plotted where they go. Organization A is an advocacy organization. It seems like a service, but they're actually not the organization giving out the payments, the general assistance checks. They're helping people if they have a problem, right? And then they, trying to remember what that example is. Organization A helps folks receiving general assistance doesn't give them the general assistance from the county social services with problems regarding their eligibility. They also work with folks receiving general assistance to address issues related to policy and legislation. So this organization very likely is in the business of helping people who are having problems with their general assistance payments, because it also helps them identify folks that can be part of an advocacy solution to those problems, right? So on the face of it, it is filling the gap for a need in with that population. People that are, you know, that the system is a quagmire, to say the least. Folks get lost in it, fall through the cracks all the time. And so this organization is filling the gap and helping folks. But then it seems, at least to me, that that helps them find people to then make policy change, which is great, right? Because those systems always need to close those gaps, and people are always falling through the cracks. Very, very important work. Okay, so then let's look at the next one. Organization B is direct service. Barb, I'm finally figuring out how to change the slides myself. Organization B is providing employment training to people with mental health problems. And as part of the program, they're placed in groups and the members talk about their job training experience, as well as the course of their job search process. This we put as a direct service. For this particular population, without that kind of support, full recovery and coming back into society is impossible. It's a needed service. You cannot not have that, right? It's very particular for a particular community. You can say that maybe Organization B does a little bit of education work. Maybe it's doing a little bit of self-help because it's a group and folks are sharing their experience and their knowledge, and it's a support group for them. But it's absolutely a direct service that is run by an organization, and would probably be, for folks from that population, be difficult for them to pull together by themselves. But if an organization holds the space, they will participate and do it. And the last one is always the tricky one, because it is a folks identified it as a direct action approach. Let's go back to that. Organization C engages members around issues the residents and staff feel are important for the community. So that sounds like organizing. Yeah, you're connecting, you're engaging around issues that affect community. Most recently, they organized residents to support Organization C's application to develop 40 units of affordable housing. Clearly, you know, this is probably something that the residents could benefit from. But the difference here, what makes it just a little bit just a little bit closer to direct action organizing, but not direct action organizing, is that the application or the process for the affordable housing units belongs to the organization. It doesn't say that the people wanted this, and so the organization is supporting them because the community determined that this is what they wanted. This is an organization that has aligned issues with a particular community and has received support from the community to apply for the building of these 40 affordable housing units, right? In direct action organizing, the impetus, the drive, the approach, the way that the 40 affordable housing units would be attained is completely determined by the community, not by the organization. And that's why we put Organization C just a little above, moving upstream, definitely moving upstream towards collective empowerment, and still, you know, not fully direct action organizing. Okay, so direct action organizing is a form of community organizing. So let's take a minute to talk about community organizing. Community organizing is about building a base of people in order to empower one's community to achieve social change through collective power. That's why looking at the spectrum of empowerment, not from a perspective where one approach is better than the other. All approaches are needed. Our communities need individual empowerment. We need education. We need the autonomy to help ourselves. We need to be advocating for things. We need to be advocating for legislative and administrative change. But we also need to build a base of power, such as what direct action organizing would offer, and other kinds of organizing that are closer to upstream to collective empowerment. So how do we do this, right? How do we start doing more of this? How do we see that spectrum like a little river, and, you know, we want a little paddle. We want to paddle upstream and get closer to collective empowerment in a way that makes sense. So the way that we do that in community organizing is to organize to build power through campaigns that promote institutional change. And you see this little image of the tree, right? Community organizing in and of itself is not a liberatory practice. I'll say that again. Community organizing in and of itself is not a liberatory practice. It's not going to get us free. There are necessarily, because there are folks on the right, there is folks who are white supremacists who use community organizing approaches and methods to build their base, right? What differentiates community organizing from communities such as ours is to be rooted in a particular vision of what the world needs to look like, right? And you see the roots here: racial justice, gender and sexuality justice, economic justice, anti-oppression justice, global equity, and human rights is what grounds our transformative approach or understanding of what community organizing is. And you'll see around the tree just the different elements, and there, you know, there's more, but what drives community organizing is always institutional change rooted in these this vision and these values that you see portrayed as the roots of this tree. And institutional change happens when a public or private institution changes its policies, procedures, and/or practices in response to community demands. So we build a base of power. We run campaigns. Our campaigns are demanding institutional change, not just little reforms here and there, but we want institutional change, right? Sometimes we do we do the reforms, but our bigger, like, eye on the prize is systemic and institutional change. I'm going to skip that slide, and because we're running out of time. And so I want to return to this spectrum of social change approaches. And one of the things we want to do is have folks consider and think of, like, well, where does, if you work for an organization, or you're a member of an organization, or you volunteer at an organization, where would you plot that organization on this spectrum of social change? And it's not a, you know, oh, you picked the wrong side, you know, it's an honest assessment of where are we playing our strength, right? What if we're a service or if we're a self-help, and you know, to just look at that and explore that. We want to invite you to do that, and we also want to invite you to to try it on for size. After each of these webinars, we want to invite folks to adopt something new, try something out that that you learn or that we suggest in these sessions. So one, I just shared, plot your organization on the spectrum of social change approaches. We'll send links after this webinar so that you can go back and read through things and look at the clips and a little bit more material on how to do that. Second, have a conversation, formal or informal, with your organization. Again, if you're a member or if it's where you work or where you volunteer, about whether or not moving upstream on the spectrum is possible. We need it right now. We absolutely need the other approaches, but we need more collective empowerment, especially in the months ahead and next year, and for the foreseeable future, right? So what would it mean to move upstream? And then finally, we invite you to consider what the definition of empowerment means to you personally, and where you want to locate yourself personally on the spectrum of social change, where you want to step into your leadership and move upstream into collective action if you aren't already plugged into collective action. And if you are, how can you deepen that participation and that commitment? I want to hand it over to Rika to wrap us up.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Shannon. Barb, of course, we couldn't do it without you. Thanks to everybody who attended. We really appreciate you being here, and we welcome you to join us on the rest of the series, which will be every other Saturday until, what is the last one?
September 14th.
September 14th. Thank you.
So we'll go ahead and we'll share the recording with everybody on Monday so that if you want to go back and listen again, you can have that opportunity to do so. We'll also share all of the links for the videos, including the one that we weren't able to get going. And we want to thank everybody for joining us today for our very first block party. Absolutely, we are family, and we know that without each other, we are not able to do anything, that we are coming together for collective justice. And just want to say that we are PWN USA, which is the U.S. Positive Women's Network. We are a membership body by and for women living with HIV. And if you'd like to learn more about us, you can find us at www.pwn-usa.org. So thank you all for joining us, and again, have a wonderful Saturday, and we'll see you July 13th, where we will continue our series for block party building, block by block, building blocks for our liberation as well as community organizing. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our facilitators.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye.